This is how I will shatter the deep state and restore government that is controlled by the people and for the people. Thank you very much.
Many wonder how Democrats would respond to a Trump presidential victory. Well, now we know, at least in part and for the moment. You're about to hear President Biden assured Americans he called for a peaceful and orderly transition.
It's good to see you all. Particularly good to see my granddaughter sitting in the front row here. Hi, Finn. How are you, honey? For over 200 years, America has carried on the greatest experiment in self-government in the history of the world. And that's not hyperbole, that's a fact. We're the people. The people vote and choose their own leaders, and they do it peacefully. And we're in a democracy. The will of the people always prevails. Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. And I assured him that I'd direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. That's what the American people deserve.
But maybe we should say not so fast, as we now see the Democrats are playing their hand and planning a shadow cabinet to oppose the incoming Trump administration, as the SGT report and others like IFA, Intercessors for America, are now warning.
And by the way, the Democrats, get this, there's breaking news. The Democrats are now openly engaging in insurrection as they try to form a shadow cabinet to oppose Trump's Agenda 47. They are in full-blown panic. This is treason.
If Trump seeks to eliminate the Department of Education, Congresswoman Johanna Hayes, a former Teacher of the Year, could step up as shadow education secretary to loudly defend public education in the United States. If Trump orders Marco Rubio to hand Ukraine and much of Eastern Europe to Russian President Vladimir Putin, Congressman Greg Meeks, as Shadow Secretary of State, could be a strong voice in support of maintaining international relationships and protecting democracy at home and abroad.
What it really is the deep state's Hail Mary attempt to oppose what could be called Trump's Agenda 47, which promises to shadow the deep state and restore government that is controlled by the people and for the people. Listen now to parts of what President-elect Donald Trump says he will do and why the left is scared crazy.
Here's my plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption once and for all, and corruption it is. First, I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively. Second, we will clean out all of the corrupt actors in our national security and intelligence apparatus, and there are plenty of them. The departments and agencies that have been weaponized will be completely overhauled so that faceless bureaucrats will never again be able to target and persecute conservatives, Christians, or the left's political enemies, which they're doing now at a level that nobody can believe even possible. Third, we will totally reform FISA courts, which are so corrupt that the judges seemingly do not care when they are lied to in warrant applications. So many judges have seen so many applications that they know were wrong, or at least they must have known. They do nothing about it. They're lied to. Fourth, to expose the hoaxes and abuses of power that have been tearing our country apart, we will establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to declassify and publish all documents on deep state spying, censorship, and corruption, and there are plenty of them. Fifth, we will launch a major crackdown on government leakers who collude with the fake news to deliberately weave false narratives and to subvert our government and our democracy. When possible, we will press criminal charges. Sixth, we will make every Inspector General's office independent and physically separated from the departments they oversee, so they do not become the protectors of the deep state. Seventh, I will ask Congress to establish an independent auditing system to continually monitor our intelligence agencies to ensure they are not spying on our citizens or running disinformation campaigns against the American people, or that they are not spying on someone's campaign like they spied on my campaign. Eighth, we will continue the effort launched by the Trump administration to move parts of the sprawling federal bureaucracy to new locations outside the Washington swamp. Just as I moved the Bureau of Land Management to Colorado, as many as 100,000 government positions could be moved out, and I mean immediately, of Washington to places filled with patriots who love America, and they really do love America. Ninth, I will work to ban federal bureaucrats from taking jobs at the companies they deal with and that they regulate. So they deal with these companies and they regulate these companies, and then they want to take jobs from these companies. Doesn't work that way. Such a public display cannot go on, and it's taking place all the time, like with Big Pharma. Finally, I will push a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on members of Congress. This is how I will shatter the deep state and restore government that is controlled by the people and for the people. Thank you very much. Here's my plan to stop the chemical, physical, and emotional mutilation of our youth. On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Ridiculous. A process that includes giving kids puberty blockers, mutating their physical appearance, and ultimately performing surgery on minor children. Can you believe this? I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age. I will then ask Congress to permanently stop federal taxpayer dollars from being used to promote or pay for these procedures and pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states. It'll go very quickly. I will declare that any hospital or healthcare provider that participates in the chemical or physical mutilation of minor youth will no longer meet federal health and safety standards for Medicaid and Medicare and will be terminated from the program immediately. Furthermore, I will support the creation of a private right of action for victims to sue doctors who have unforgivably performed these procedures on minor children. The Department of Justice will investigate Big Pharma and the big hospital networks to determine whether they have deliberately covered up horrific long-term side effects of sex transitions in order to get rich at the expense of vulnerable patients, in this case, very vulnerable. We will also investigate whether Big Pharma or others have illegally marketed hormones and puberty blockers, which are in no way licensed or approved for this use. My Department of Education will inform states and school districts that if any teacher or school official suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body, they will be faced with severe consequences, including potential civil rights violations for sex discrimination. And one other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse. We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're absolutely at the bottom. We're one of the worst. So you can't do worse. We're going to end education coming out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up, all those buildings all over the place, and you have people that in many cases hate our children. We're going to send it all back to the states. Thank you very much.
And the Trump appointees are being positioned and poised to take down the corruption and the weaponization of all the agencies. The following videos are just a few examples of the coming actions that will take place and why the deep state players now clearly know what it means for them.
My initial inclination would be to use the Justice Department and the moral authority of the office, but also, the Justice Department should immediately call in begin an investigation of the medical boards and the collusion between the pharmaceutical industry and the medical boards that are delicensing these physicians who actually try to heal patients and try to treat them.
Yes, that's long overdue.
Sure is, Doc.
Will also call in the medical journals that are corrupted by the pharmaceutical industry and explain to them that they're all going to be subject to criminal and civil RICO actions. If they show us a way that they're going to stop revoking studies and refusing to publish studies that challenge the mercantile interests of pharmaceutical companies. We're going to change the way business is done at NIH.
Listen to Senator Tuberville.
And we did a big study in the Pentagon. Well, we got 44 four-star generals. Their budgets are $250 million each. $250 million. They have about 2,000 employees for each one of them. What's going on here? We need to take all that money, shut down the Pentagon to about 3 sides instead of 5, and say, listen, let's build the best military in the world. Get away from this affirmative action. Get away from this woke nonsense. And let's build a killing machine. Because if we don't, they're coming at us from all sides. And Pete will do a job because he's not one of them.
I totally agree, and I hope your fellow senators agree. Pete will do that job as Secretary of Defense.
Tulsi Gabbard is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves and a combat veteran. She was as a Democrat, she was placed on the watch list and persecuted by the Biden Department of Justice. You don't think that's going to help in her role? She has been a victim of the weaponized intelligence agency, Department of Justice, the DOD, all of it. That's going to be valuable experience to clean up the mess. It's great that some of these picks had themselves been victim of the weaponization of the federal agencies under the Obama administration and the Biden-Harris-Obama administration, because they know what they're up against and they know where the criminals are.
That's true. Yeah, they do. They've been on the receiving end. Who could understand it better than somebody who has suffered that? You're absolutely right.
How about the fact that RFK knows where the bodies are buried?
Boy, does he.
As it relates to everything that went down leading up to the COVID lies, the rollout of the bioweapon masquerading as a vaccine, and the pandemic lockdowns. At the very head of the snake, but the very top of that snake would be Tony Fauci, Peter Hotez, and Bill Gates. Listen to this, because guess what, Bill Gates, Fauci, and Peter Hotez? Prepare to be indicted.
If you read the last chapter of my book, on Fauci, which I think is the most disturbing chapter, it goes through this history of pandemic preparedness simulations that occurred beginning in 2001. And each one of them had something in common. They ignored the pandemic preparedness protocols that had been agreed upon by the CDC, by WHO, by the European Medical Agency, by the National Health Service in the UK, of what do you do in a pandemic? Because all of those protocols said you never lock down the public. You look for therapeutic drugs that are off the shelf, that are effective against these diseases. You get people to strengthen their immune systems, but you let society continue operating. That's what everybody in the health field agreed upon. But the military and spy agencies had a different pandemic protocol, and they were the inverse of what you would do of medicine. They were about locking down subjects, about using these pandemics as a pretext for clamping down totalitarian controls. And the last one of these was in 2019 in October. And it was hosted by Bill Gates, by Fauci, and by Avril Haines. I'm sure a lot of you have gone and looked at this on YouTube. It's called Event 201. That same week, Bill Gates, who was overseeing this simulation, bought 1.1 million shares of BioNTech vaccine, which later became the Pfizer vaccine. He then sold almost all that stock, 87%, 2 years later at a $242 million profit. And a week after that, he publicly announced the vaccine didn't work. This is what you call a pump and dump scheme. As he was the guy who was on TV with his minion, Peter Hotez, who took $52 million from Gates for Gates made his institution. Oh, you had the pair of them pumping up the stock for 2 years and then dumping it a week before he goes on TV. It says, oh, it didn't work after all.
Yep, it was World War III being waged secretly against humanity on a global scale, and they got caught. There's no unwinding this for them.
And
they don't get to go about their business peacefully anymore, and I don't mean peacefully in the streets. I won't harass anybody, but they're going to get indicted, and they are going to be investigated, and they're going to be tried for their crimes. And then they stole an election, and then they rolled out a bioweapon masquerading as a vaccine, and now they've been caught. They're going to think tanks, and they're going to try to reorganize. Listen to this.
Mark my words, you are going to see an exodus from Tony Blinken's State Department, and they are going to go straight into civil society jobs at Brookings, at the Atlantic Council, at CSIS, at the Council on Foreign Relations, at the Penn Biden Center, at Stanford University, at the Harvard Belfer Center, and you name it. They are all going to get their little perches there, and they're going to take that residual influence, and they're going to be making back-channel deals with NATO, with the European Union, with the governments in Brazil and Australia, and they are going to try to do that Brazil strategy that they were able to successfully do under Brazil, and to make it so that the only platforms that are allowed to have global dominance on social media are the ones who do not allow their political enemies to have a voice. And there will be a constant fight between the Trump administration's diplomatic efforts through the government and the blob's censorship diplomatic efforts in the shadow government.
Well, what all this means is the scales are being lifted from the American public, and a great awakening is happening, and the deep state knows that they've been caught. And make no mistake about it, these aren't actions against one's political opponents, as the mainstream media continue to proclaim or purport. These are actions against treason, sedition, and democide of a long-entrenched deep state and its players, and its justice is surely long overdue. This is why we must continue to pray, and pray for the continued protection for all of those in the incoming administration. These actions actually coincide with the words of Jesus that are found in Luke chapter 8, verse 17, when he said, "For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be brought to light or made known to all." Well, I want to leave you with this thought today, that in the midst of great things happening, we should always, above all else, keep our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, for he is the sole Messiah and an answer to everything. And today I want you to consider that, as I said, that we're to pray, keep him first. And until next time, I'm your host, Pastor Chris Morgan. I call you blessed.